Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere warm, dry, and impossibly quiet. Timbuktu at sundown. You're standing in the soft gold haze of the Sahara, the sand crunching gently under your feet. The distant echo of donkeys clopping through narrow alleys. The air smells of dust, parchment, and something spicy. Maybe cumin or the last whiff of someone's dinner tagine. You adjust the hem of your robe, shielding your eyes from the low sun as it drops behind the thick, mud brick walls of an ancient city that, if we're honest, most people only know as a punchline for middle of nowhere. But tonight, we're not here for the heat or the exoticism. We're here for paper. Well, not just any paper. Scrolls, manuscripts, volumes. All painstakingly copied by hand. And not just by men. You're about to drift through the forgotten corners of history where women wrote quietly, taught discreetly, and preserved worlds in ink that still stains the fingers of modern-day conservators. You probably won't survive this if you're looking for action-packed drama, but if you're here to fall gently asleep to the sound of someone describing ancient scribal practices in soft, ASMR detail, you're in exactly the right place. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how global this sleepy little community is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind carries little bits of sand that settle in the folds of your sleeves as you step through the ochre archway of Timbuktu's Jingareber Mosque. You pass by wide-eyed goats and uninterested cats, and everything seems touched by time. The kind of time that doesn't tick by on a clock, but moves like drifting dunes, slow, soft, and endlessly repetitive. It's the 15th century, maybe the 14th. Dates here are fuzzy, like your vision is starting to blur with sleep. Timbuktu is thriving. It's a center of trade, of learning, of religion. Camel caravans bring salt from the desert, gold from the south, and books, yes, books, from every direction. Scholars come from Cairo, Mecca, Andalusia. They recite poetry, debate legal texts, and occasionally argue over whose slippers are fancier. One mainstream fact here, at its height, Timbuktu hosted over 25,000 students across its informal university networks. That's basically medieval Harvard, minus the ivy and the ironic tote bags. But you walk past the scholars. You're not interested in their loud debates. You duck behind a quieter door into a shaded alley where the air is cooler. There, hidden from public view, is where the real magic happened. The silent rooms, the ink-stained fingers, the people who copied, rewrote, corrected, and sometimes even authored entire texts, without ever getting credit. Many were enslaved, some were hired. A few were wives, daughters, or sisters of prominent male scholars. And a quiet number were women scribes? Not many, but enough to leave behind traces, scratches of identity in margins, oddly feminine phrasing in theological treatises, and ink that smelled like rosewater and soot. You brush your hand along a stucco wall. You can almost hear the scratch of a reed pen inside. One stroke at a time, letter by letter. Words forming like sand paintings, only meant to last a little while. Now here's something quirky. Scribes often used fish glue and powdered date pits to make their ink stick better in the desert climate. It worked surprisingly well, unless of course a goat ate your manuscript, which apparently happened more than once. There's an actual documented case of a scholar complaining that a wandering sheep made off with a third of my Quranic commentary. Classic. Historians still argue whether the women involved in these manuscript houses were true scribes, copyists trained to match a master's script, or simply household helpers filling in gaps. But evidence keeps turning up. A few faint signatures, one even reads, "Written by the hand of the mother of so-and-so." Imagine spending 6 months copying a text and your whole legacy is still someone else's name. The air inside these homes smells like old leather and dried ink. You sit by a small window, squinting as the light fades. A low hum fills your ears. Not modern noise, but the buzzing quiet of candlelight, of people murmuring verses to themselves as they write. Women didn't just write religious texts. They copied medical treatises, poetry, and even travel accounts. And when no one was looking, they added notes in the margins, corrections, complaints, even jokes. One scrap of parchment found in a private archive included a short side note. This man writes like a duck's footprints. And yes, ducks were present in Timbuktu. Not common, but they made appearances, usually in wealthier homes where a little splash of water was possible. You lean back, watching the last light disappear through the palm branch screen over the window. The silence deepens, and so does your curiosity. How many of these anonymous pages were guided by female hands? How many lines of flowing Arabic script began at the fingertips of someone who never got to sign her name? It's hard to say, maybe impossible, but the scrolls are still here. Some are crumbling, some still smell faintly of the incense stored with them, and a few are being quietly cataloged, digitized, and, more often than not, still misattributed. And so, you sit in this city of paper and heat, letting your mind drift backward, past the tourists, past the colonial explorers, past the erasures. You follow a paper trail laid down not by conquerors or kings, but by the quiet persistence of women who knew that ink, once dry, is almost forever. You lean against the cool mud brick wall of a courtyard as night creeps in, the sky darkening from copper to a deep indigo. You can almost hear the muffled conversations behind lattice doors, soft voices, the shuffle of slippers on tile, the clink of a teacup set gently down. Timbuktu by candlelight is even quieter than you expected. The noise of the scholars is far away now. Here, in the domestic shadow of the city's famed learning institutions, is where the less celebrated work unfolded, far from the lecture halls beneath woven ceilings, beside steaming pots of millet porridge. Timbuktu didn't become a center of knowledge by accident. You're standing on one of the key arteries of the Saharan trade routes. Imagine caravans stretching for miles, camels loaded with salt slabs from Taudeni, gold from the Niger Bend, slaves, spices, and most importantly, books. Books from Cairo, from Al-Andalus, even from Persia. And with books came knowledge, and with knowledge came the need to copy, to translate, to preserve. One mainstream fact: during the height of Timbuktu's intellectual boom in the 15th and 16th centuries, it's estimated that there were over 700,000 manuscripts housed across private libraries and mosques. That's more than double the number of books in some modern national archives. Not bad for a place people think of as a myth, and you start to realize someone had to copy all of those. Monks didn't do it. This wasn't a cloistered world of robed men in stained glass scriptoriums. Here it was households, families, sometimes whole blocks devoted to the quiet art of transcription. Which brings you to the women. See, while formal education for women in Timbuktu wasn't widespread, literacy was quietly passed down in domestic spaces. Mothers taught daughters the alphabet in the margins of cookbooks. Sisters copied pages of hadith after dinner. Widows, left with their husband's library, learned to keep it alive out of necessity. Not glamorous, not public, but steady. Essential. Quirky tidbit? In some homes, women used leftover scroll margins as notepads, for shopping lists, childbirth records, even as recipe cards. There's a fragment of a mathematical manuscript that literally includes a stew recipe in the bottom margin. Can you imagine flipping through a dense text on geometry and suddenly finding, add 3 pinches of tamarind and stir until fragrant? And while the men were out teaching or preaching or debating, the women were often the ones maintaining the books, cleaning them, repairing torn pages with thread made from palm fibers, copying worn-out text to preserve them. Sometimes they added flourishes, little hearts, stars, even crescent moons in the calligraphy. Not official, but deeply human. You trace your fingers along a wooden door. Inside, maybe, is a low table where a young girl sits beside her aunt, learning how to copy the curves of a single Arabic letter. You can smell tea brewing, something herbal and earthy. Perhaps carcada, or a mix of dried leaves grown in some garden, that never makes it into the history books. Historians still argue whether these women operated as formal scribes or informal copyists. Some say they were just caretakers, minding the books while the men did the real work. Others believe they were an integral, if invisible, part of the entire system. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. What's certain is that their influence lingers in the rhythm of the city's intellectual heartbeat. You hear a breeze stir the palm leaves above. Somewhere nearby, a child recites a verse aloud, repeating it slowly, correcting herself. A voice, older, patient, gently guides her pronunciation. Education here isn't always done through lectures. It's woven into daily life, into repetition, into memorization under the stars. There's a particularly fascinating female figure whispered about in local lore, sometimes named Aicha, sometimes Zaira, described as a scholar's wife who not only copied texts but compiled her own collection of women's writings. Nothing survives under her name, of course, but the memory, the legend, lingers. Perhaps that's all some of them hoped for. And then there's the ink. Oh, the ink. Made from soot, gum arabic, and water. Yes. But women had their variations. Some added pomegranate peel to darken it. Others mixed in rosewater, both for scent and a hint of acidity. A scholar once noted that a certain book smelled faintly of gardens and ash. That's not just poetic. That's how you know a woman probably prepared that ink. You sit by the edge of a shallow basin in the courtyard, watching stars appear above like tiny holes pricked in velvet. You imagine the women, elbows resting on low wooden boards, hands steady as they copied religious texts by the light of a flickering oil lamp. Their work was slow, precise, and deeply intentional. There was no Ctrl plus Z, no backspace, just sand, sweat, and the occasional blotch that had to be cleverly disguised as a flourish. In the back of your mind, you picture one woman, alone after her children are asleep, hunched over a page, her head wrapped in cloth, whispering verses to herself. Not for status, not for credit, but to preserve something fragile, something essential. And outside, the world turns on. Camels groan as they settle in for the night. The sand cools beneath your feet. And the books, silent, waiting, sleep in the nooks of every home that dares to remember. You ease through the alley, your footsteps muffled by soft layers of sand blown in from the desert. There's a stillness to the houses here. Tall, sun-baked walls, no glass in the windows, just carved wooden shutters and thick curtains. Somewhere behind one of these, a scribe leans over a page in quiet concentration. But not the kind you're picturing. This one wears a cotton headscarf flecked with ash, and her fingers are stained dark with ink. She's a woman, working, writing, and most likely being forgotten even as she breathes. Behind every well-known male scholar in Timbuktu, behind every grand speech and lecture, there were quiet hands doing the copying, the organizing, the prepping. Sometimes those hands were wives, sometimes daughters. Sometimes women known only as the servant of so-and-so. But behind those veils and titles, many of them were more than helpers. They were literate, skilled, and meticulous scribes. You press your ear to the thick wood of a courtyard gate. There's no shouting debate inside, no pompous declaration of intellectual supremacy. Just the rhythmic rustle of paper, the occasional sigh, maybe the clink of a penknife being tapped on a wooden desk. You can almost smell the ink again, sharp, earthy, with a whisper of smoke. Inside these homes, rooms weren't, labeled as offices or libraries. They were bedrooms, kitchens, back rooms, places where writing happened in the midst of life. One mainstream historical fact that rarely gets airtime: many manuscript houses in Timbuktu were family affairs. Scribes trained their children, wives assisted in collation and binding, and women helped maintain archives. Not officially, not loudly, but consistently. Quirky tidbit? Some manuscripts were wrapped in colorful textiles, patchwork cloths that served both as protection and bookmarks. In a few cases, the fabrics themselves were inscribed with prayers. One noted page was wrapped in a woman's headscarf, which scholars later realized bore handwritten blessings along the edge. A portable library and a wearable charm in one. The woman behind the curtain, let's call her Miriam tonight, just for comfort, isn't copying religious texts for fame. She's preserving a local medical manual, one filled with treatments using desert herbs and oils, recipes for wound salves, notes about when to harvest frankincense, marginal comments in a second handwriting, maybe her mother's, reminding her that too much clove oil can agitate the spirits. Science and superstition, inked in tandem. You crouch down beside the small window, peering through the lattice. Miriam's daughter sits on a woven mat nearby, tracing letters in sand with her fingertip. They vanish the moment she sweeps her hand across them. Impermanence as a teaching tool. It's not a formal schoolroom. It's not even official. But it's education, passed down in whispers and muscle memory. Historians still argue whether women like Miriam were truly regarded as scribes or merely household helpers with some literacy. Was it enough to write? Or did one need permission, status, and certification to count? The debate lingers, like the scent of old ink on faded parchment. But maybe it's the work that speaks loudest. The manuscripts themselves hold clues. Some show edits in different handwriting, with distinct styles, thicker strokes, different spacing. In one case, a scribe was identified by her habit of placing small floral marks after every fifth line. A habit so consistent, so stylized, it was eventually matched to 3 different texts found in separate homes. She never signed her name, but her flowers bloomed across the page. The walls here are made of banco, mud mixed with straw, baked hard by sun and time. They insulate against the brutal heat, but they also muffle sound. You rest your head against one as the cool seeps into your skin. You hear the scratch of a pen inside, the drip of a slow leaking jar, the quiet hum of someone reciting as they copy. It's easy to romanticize this world, but don't forget, these women were often unpaid. Their labor was taken for granted. If something they wrote was praised, the credit went to the male scholar who oversaw the library. Their names, when they appear at all, are often parenthetical. Or worse, unknown female relative. And yet, they kept writing. One fragment found buried beneath a collapsed home in the Sankoray Quarter included a half-copied poem about longing, likely Sufi in nature. But it ends abruptly, mid-line. Some believe the writer was interrupted. Others think it was deliberately unfinished, a kind of mystical invitation for the reader to complete the thought. But tucked in the margin was one final word. Zara. A name. Just that. No title, no flourish, just Zara. You let the silence deepen. There's a strange comfort in it. A weight that isn't heavy. A kind of sacred stillness. The kind of hush where history breathes. Where forgotten hands left their mark, not in monuments or glory, but in ink, paper, and the knowledge that someone someday might read it again. And maybe that someone is you. The moon climbs higher now, silvering the rooftops of Timbuktu, turning every ledge and lintel into a faint outline of shadowed light. You walk slowly through the narrow lanes where doorways curve like half-lidded eyes and wind carries the occasional snatch of a lullaby sung by someone cradling a baby behind thick adobe walls. Somewhere nearby, a candle gutters out, but the manuscripts endure, sheltered, waiting, smelling faintly of thyme and cinnamon. You enter another quiet home, this one less grand than the last. A low wooden ceiling with beams darkened by years of oil smoke. On the floor, the outlines of foot traffic, faded rug paths and cushioned dips where readers have sat, cross-legged for generations. This is not the domain of the scholars who lectured under vaulted mosque domes. This is where manuscripts lived real lives, held, spilled on, whispered over. Where ink was ground by hand and dry reeds were chewed into nibs by someone squinting in the flickering light. One mainstream historical truth to ground you here. Much of Timbuktu's manuscript tradition was decentralized. Unlike Europe, where scribes often worked in monastic centers or official scriptoria, manuscript production in Timbuktu took place in private homes. This meant a kind of organic collaboration, families working together, neighbors assisting each other, and yes, women contributing in ways the historical record has largely decided to accidentally misplace. You ease down beside a low table where several pages are spread out to dry. The script is elegant, curling in tight spirals before straightening into rows. You run your fingers over the edges, rough, uneven. Cut with care but not perfection. And here's the quirky detail of the night. Parchment wasn't just paper here. Sometimes it was made from fish skin. Yes, fish. In a desert. Catfish, to be exact. Dried, flattened, and coated with a thin resin to make it readable. Practical, sort of, smelly. Absolutely. But what's a little stink when you're preserving Aristotle? A figure moves quietly past you, robes brushing the stone floor. She sits, not in the center of the room, but close to the lamp. You can tell she's done this hundreds of times. She doesn't fuss with the tools, just dips her reed in the inkwell and begins to copy. Her eyes don't dart around. Her hand is steady. No flourish, no hesitation. Her name might be Fatima or Halima or, well, you'll probably never know. She's copying a collection of legal judgments from Gao. Dry stuff, lots of names, lists of fines, oaths, conditions for property disputes. It's not thrilling material, but it's knowledge. Necessary, preserved. She reaches the end of a paragraph, then pauses. Beside the lamp is a small bowl, dates maybe. She eats one, presses a blotter to the ink, and then resumes. Her hand moves more quickly now, tracing over familiar phrases. She doesn't just write them, she knows them. Maybe she's memorized them. Maybe she's recited them in the quiet moments while rocking a baby to sleep. Historians still argue whether manuscript culture in Timbuktu allowed for intellectual authorship from women, or merely transcription. Were they thinkers or just recorders? Did they create or only preserve? The line blurs. One surviving page includes a commentary on a Quranic verse in two different voices. One more formal and traditional. The other more questioning. It's unsigned, but the second voice uses phrasing not typically found in male-authored texts. Was it a wife? A daughter? A student? Or all three? You sip from a clay cup someone has left. Nearby, just water, cool and slightly metallic. The ink in the air mixes with the scent of night blossoms outside the window. You feel a little drowsy now, as if time itself is slowing, slipping, almost pausing altogether. The woman continues writing. Occasionally she leans back and shakes her wrist. Her knuckles crack. Soft, familiar. A reminder that this is physical labor, not just scholarly work. Her back will ache tomorrow. She might get a splinter, she might burn her finger if she's not careful around the oil lamp. And yet, she persists. Sometimes whole sections of text were written by groups. A husband, his cousin, a visiting scholar, and a sister-in-law, each taking turns copying parts. One small collection of astronomy treatises, currently housed in a private family archive, contains 4 different scripts, all dated within a few months. At least one appears to have been written by someone learning to write as they copied. Letter forms change. They start clumsy and get more confident. A marginal note in red says, "Much improved." That same note is accompanied by a faint fingerprint, small, slender. There's something so beautiful about that. So quiet. The idea that scribal practice could be both a necessity and a way of learning. A kind of domestic school without desks or exams or graduation ceremonies. Just repetition, effort, and ink. The woman beside you finishes a page and sets it gently aside. She reaches for another. Her face is calm, focused, not proud, not desperate for credit. But there's something steady about her. Like she knows the value of what she's doing, even if no one else ever will. And maybe that's the entire point. You rise slowly, careful not to disturb the drying pages. Outside, the night is warm but not hot. The stars are sharp and cold, and you realize this knowledge, this fragile thread of ink through time, was preserved not in royal palaces or golden libraries, but in homes like this one, by women like her, tired, anonymous, unshakable. You follow the scent of cardamom through another courtyard, this one livelier, filled with soft laughter, the metallic clink of ladles and brass pots, and the squeak of chalk on a writing slate. It's evening now, and the day's heat has retreated into the baked walls, leaving the air loose and breathable. You pass through a narrow corridor lit by a single lantern swaying in the breeze. In a side room, a group of young girls sits on a mat, cross-legged, each with a small wooden board balanced across her knees. They're copying Quranic verses, not in silence, but with rhythmic recitation, sing-song tones that flutter out into the courtyard like music. This isn't a madrasa, not officially. It's more informal. A neighborhood auntie, maybe a widow, maybe a former student herself, teaching whoever is willing to learn. And this, right here, is one of the great unwritten truths of Timbuktu's intellectual culture. Women taught, sometimes unofficially, sometimes secretly, sometimes only to girls. But they taught. One mainstream fact for your sleepy mind to hold on to. Although women rarely held official titles in the Islamic scholarly tradition of Timbuktu, there are scattered records, notes, letters, marginalia, that confirm women as educators, especially in matters of literacy and religious recitation. Their names are sparse, their faces undocumented, but the pattern is clear. Teaching happened in the home, and much of it flowed from mother to daughter. Tonight's quirky twist? A few surviving manuscript pages contain playful doodles, flowers, animals, once even a suspiciously modern-looking shoe sketched in the corner. Not all were idle distractions. Some may have been mnemonic devices, small visual aids to help young learners remember difficult passages. There's a drawing of a lion next to a proverb about courage, another of a date palm beside a verse on patience, and at least one of these is signed, tiny and careful, drawn by Isata, age 11. Imagine that, a scribbled masterpiece tucked into the margins of West African wisdom. The teacher, let's call her Khadija, adjusts her headscarf and checks on each girl's progress, gently correcting posture, pointing to missed diacritics. She's got a commanding presence, but her tone is soft. This is no strict disciplinarian. This is a woman with patience that could humble a camel caravan. You glance around the room. Along the wall are a few stacked manuscripts, most wrapped in faded cloth, the kind of hand-dyed indigo that leaves a whisper of blue on your fingertips. Not all are religious texts. One you notice is a commentary on trade law. Another appears to be a poetic treatise, though it's hard to tell. It's written in a flowing, artistic hand that curves and dips like sand dunes in moonlight. Khadija herself likely copied at least some of them. Maybe as a girl. Maybe sitting right where her students are now. Maybe while her own teacher stirred a pot of lentils nearby. This isn't formal education. It's generational literacy. A slow transmission of knowledge that never makes the headlines but outlasts them all the same. Historians still argue whether these teaching women were anomalies or if they represented a broader cultural norm that simply wasn't documented. The lack of names makes it difficult, but when you see the wear patterns on the slates, the multiple handwritings in one book, and the soft repairs, seams mended with old embroidery thread, you start to sense the truth. These weren't isolated events. These women weren't exceptions. They were the norm we forgot to remember. One girl raises her hand, not for permission, but with a question. Khadija listens, nods, and then recites a line from memory. One knot on the board. It's from a Sufi poem. The girl doesn't understand the metaphor, not yet, but she smiles anyway. The verse is beautiful, like cool water on a hot night. A little boy darts past the doorway, giggling. Not part of the class, but clearly comfortable in this world of words. He might join next year, or maybe he'll just grow up surrounded by this quiet devotion to language, to understanding, and to memory. You sit a while longer, letting the sounds blend into a soft hum. The scraping of chalk, the cadence of verse, the rustle of robes as someone leans over to help a classmate. It's not dramatic. No one's winning awards. But it's how the world was held together. You remember now, one fragment from a trader's letter describes his wife as guardian of the household books. Not owner, not writer, guardian. A loaded word, especially in Timbuktu, where books were more valuable than gold, where manuscripts were sometimes used as dowries, and where losing a single page could start a legal dispute. To be a guardian was not symbolic. It was logistical. It meant knowing what was where, how to care for it, how to make it legible for the next hand. One document was found with instructions written at the end. If my son is absent, my daughter Zainab will continue the copying. That's not a statement of encouragement. That's a protocol, a rule, a fact. And here, tonight, in the glow of a lantern and the comfort of tea simmering nearby, Zainabs are still at work. You rise and move back through the courtyard. The lesson continues behind you, and you feel no need to rush. The stars are thick now, blanketing the sky like unrolled vellum. If you squint, they almost look like letters. Or maybe that's just your imagination, already softened by drowsy repetition. One more girl reads aloud. A line about wisdom being lighter than air but harder to carry. And someone, maybe you, scribbles that into the margin of memory. You shuffle forward through the dust, the sand beneath your feet now cool and loose, no longer baking from the sun. The wind is softer, brushing your cheek like a passing sleeve. Timbuktu sleeps lightly. Somewhere a dog barks once, then goes silent again. You pass under a crumbling archway and enter a neighborhood older than most. Walls pockmarked by time, doors bleached by the sun, hinges groaning like old men when they swing. Inside one of these weathered homes, you spot something strange on a low shelf. A tightly bound manuscript wrapped in oilcloth and looped with twine. Beside it, a small, rusted key. The manuscript is locked. Not because it's valuable, though it probably is, but because it holds personal writings. Yes, even centuries ago, people kept diaries, and at least one of them may have belonged to a woman. One mainstream fact, and a juicy one at that. Not all of Timbuktu's manuscripts were religious or legal. Some were personal. Poetry, letters, dreams, even notes on parenting. Scholars now believe a small subset of these were written by women, though few are openly signed. Privacy wasn't just a social custom, it was protection. Especially for thoughts considered too emotional, too personal, too feminine. The manuscript here, found hidden under floorboards during a renovation, includes dream records written in first-person narrative. I saw a well that overflowed, and the water turned to script. That line repeats twice. Then, my sister told me I must write it down. The writing is slanted, uneven in places, but the ink is strong and the phrasing poetic. Scholars argue over whether it was a mystic, a healer, or simply a woman with vivid dreams and access to ink. Here's your quirky gem for the night. Some women in Timbuktu used scent markers in their writings. Clove rubbed on pages, a dab of rose oil at the edges, tiny aromatic signatures. One such manuscript smells faintly of lemon balm centuries later. Not enough to perfume the room, just enough to startle a curious archivist who leaned in too close. It smelled like someone had just left, he wrote. You duck into a shadowy room and the air thickens. Not from heat, but from presence. The kind of heavy silence that makes your ears ring a little. Against one wall is a wooden chest, carved and scorched, its lid slightly ajar. Inside are scrolls wrapped not in cloth, but in strips of what looks like softened bark. Fragile, fibrous, and carefully labeled in faded ink. Recitations of peace. They're not Quranic, but poetic. Love letters to God. Longing for stillness. Reflections on grief. Historians still argue whether these writings, found in private homes and never cataloged in mosque libraries, belonged to female authors or were simply copied by women. One particular scroll includes a line, "My husband speaks with the imam, but I speak with the wind." That's not exactly a line you'd expect from a male cleric, but there it is. Uncredited, undeniably poetic. You sit cross-legged beside the chest, and as the wind sighs through a crack in the wall, a page lifts gently on its own. A line floats up at you. Silence is a second pen. You could swear the handwriting tilts like someone's smile. Further in the room, there's an alcove, half filled with firewood, the rest with old writing tools. Not neatly arranged, but used, practical, coated with years of ash and ink stains. There's a reed pen hardened with use, and beside it a shard of mirror. Not for vanity, for light. Writers sometimes placed mirrors to reflect lamp glow onto their pages, bouncing illumination where it was needed most. A clever trick. And for a woman writing in secret or after hours, a necessity. You can almost picture her, knees drawn up, one hand steadying the mirror, the other moving carefully across the page. Not fast. Not for performance. Just because the words needed somewhere to go. The room holds her story like breath trapped in a jar. You feel her presence in the choices, where she placed her ink pot, how she labeled her pages, even in the rhythm of the lines. A slow patience, an intention. Another personal note in the stack reads, "May my daughter never forget how the ink moved before her first tooth came in." That's not just a record. That's love. That's memory. That's a mother anchoring the physical moment of body, of life, with the abstract elegance of language. You run your fingers lightly over the bark pages. They're rougher than parchment, almost like skin. The script here is tighter, more rushed. Maybe a journal, maybe a copied prayer, maybe both. This one ends with a single word repeated 3 times. Safe, safe, safe. It's tempting to imagine what her life was like when she wrote, why she hid these words, who she was trying to reach. But the truth is, you'll never know for sure. You can only witness, quietly, carefully, like she once did. You take a deep breath. The night is quiet again, but the manuscripts keep whispering. Through rough pages and fragrant ink, through cracked mirrors and crooked pens, through words that never needed to be published, only preserved. And you begin to understand. This history isn't made of grand moments. It's made of small ones, of time stolen between chores, of wisdom woven into whispers, of courage pressed between the pages like a drying herb, unseen but still potent. She never meant to be famous. She meant to be understood. And maybe tonight, she finally is. You emerge from the shadowy house with your thoughts still tangled in bark paper pages and dream-scribbled verses. The wind has changed. Lighter now, carrying the faint tang of river clay and something herbal. Maybe crushed mint or tamarind. You walk slowly, half hoping to stumble upon another locked manuscript tucked behind a half-collapsed wall. Instead, you find yourself on a narrow alleyway lined with uneven cobblestones and doorways, so low you'd need to duck if you were any taller. Here in this humble part of Timbuktu lived a kind of intellectual elite that didn't often make the calligraphy rolls of glory. The copyists, the scribes, the tireless transcribers who turned ideas into artifacts. Many were men, sure. But tonight, let's trail a woman, one of the quietest legends of them all. Her name may have been Fatimata, or maybe Mariam. The records are cruelly vague. But in one transaction ledger buried under flour and lentil tallies, there's this line. Payment of 3 dirhams to woman for ink labor. Ink labor. It's not much to go on. But it's everything, really. A payment. A roll. A woman whose work was worth coin. One mainstream fact to drift off with. Timbuktu in its golden age had an entire economy around manuscript production, copying, binding, ink mixing, page drying. It was an artisanal ecosystem. And women, though rarely headliners, clearly participated in it. Whether officially employed or contributing within family workshops, they helped keep the ink flowing. And now for your quirky crumb. Some scribes here used fish glue mixed with fig sap as page sealant. It gave pages a faintly sweet smell and, if overused, made them sticky. One irritated scholar reportedly wrote, "May my students' fingers not be snared in fig foolery again." So yes, even medieval Timbuktu had a version of, "Ugh, who messed up the copier?" You duck through one of the small doorways and step into a workshop. It smells of smoke, paper dust, and iron-rich ink. The tools here are surprisingly delicate. Thin bone styluses, narrow reed pens trimmed at angles so sharp you wonder how they didn't slice through the page. On one shelf sit pigment bowls made from gourd halves, ochre, charcoal, a hint of indigo that's stained everything nearby, even the air. In the corner, you spot a low writing desk, the surface burnished from use. A cloth lies draped over part of it, and beneath the cloth, the careful stacking of pages mid-copy. Some words are smudged, likely from humidity or a stray elbow. Others are so crisp you'd swear they were printed yesterday. The handwriting shifts slightly across sections, maybe two hands at work. Maybe an older scribe mentoring a younger one. Or a mother-daughter duo hunched side by side, writing under the same lamp. Historians still argue whether women were permitted full authorship of religious texts or merely allowed to copy them. The conservative assumption is that women transcribed only for educational or domestic purposes. But one scholar pointed out that certain stylistic flourishes, like looped terminal strokes and consistent use of decorative end marks, appear more often in manuscripts found in homes rather than mosques. Coincidence? Personal preference? Or the faint fingerprints of female scribes styling the pages in ways the men didn't bother to? You find a margin note, small, tilted, and likely not meant for the main reader. The baby cried through this verse, "May she grow strong." It's unsigned. But that doesn't matter, it's a voice. A woman's voice, right there between divine revelation and household interruption. You sit at the desk for a moment, careful not to disturb the tools. You imagine her dipping the reed pen, rolling it between her fingers, breathing steadily as she leans in. The pen would scratch faintly, a whisper against the paper. Outside, a donkey might bray. Someone's grinding millet with a heavy pestle. But in here, it's just you, her, and the words. She didn't write to be remembered. She wrote because someone had to. The repetition of words was sacred, not just for religious reasons, but because repetition made permanence. To copy was to protect. To write was to weave memory into matter. She may not have chosen the words, but she gave them shape. That's authorship of a kind, isn't it? A clink pulls your attention to a shelf where small copper weights are lined up like sleeping beetles. These were used to hold down curling parchment during writing. But some of them are inscribed, not in Arabic, but in Tamashek, the Tuareg script. A quiet act of multilingual pride? Or just utility? Either way, it tells you this. She moved between languages, between cultures. She didn't just transcribe text, she translated worlds. And here's a strange little detail to make your ears perk. One manuscript includes a margin quote in a different ink, reading, "Wrote this line left-handed today. Ink blot like a date." So apparently even in the 14th century, someone was having a rough writing day and decided to memorialize it. You pull away from the desk and take a final look around. The workshop is empty, but not still. Everything here feels mid-use, mid-thought, mid-story. A woman's rhythm echoing between pages, her focus in the placement of tools, her touch in the tilt of script. You step outside again, and the alley yawns open into a quieter square. Above, the stars haven't moved, but now they seem closer, hanging low and quiet like a canopy. You wonder how many of these anonymous scribes paused during long nights to look up and feel just a little smaller, or maybe a little more eternal. You wrap the image in your thoughts. A woman in the heart of Timbuktu, elbow deep in ink, her baby cooing beside her, the call to prayer drifting in through a shuttered window, her pen never stopping. That's history. Not just kings and conquests, but ink stains, fig glue, and a tired mother finishing a page by moonlight. And somehow you feel a little closer to her. Your steps grow slower now. Maybe it's the hour. Late still, with the air cooling just enough to make your breath cloud faintly. Or maybe it's the weight of all those unseen hands behind the manuscripts. You don't feel alone anymore. Timbuktu is no longer just sand and shadows. It's alive with invisible authors, gentle ghosts moving between the margins. You wind through another corridor, this one flanked by pale mud brick walls with tiny latticed windows. Above you, wooden beams jut like teeth from the upper floors, supporting nothing now but once the anchors of awnings and shade cloths. Everything here seems to lean inward, as if even the buildings are whispering, "Come closer." You stop in front of a recessed doorway painted a fading ochre. There's a delicate carving around the lintel. Simple motifs, some geometric, some floral. A telltale sign you've arrived at a family home of some means. Not aristocrats, but educated perhaps. Respected. And as you slip inside, you realize this was a teaching house. A table sits in the main room, low to the floor and wide enough for several students to sit cross-legged around it. There are ink stains on the surface, grooves worn into the wood where elbows rested, and little faded scribbles in the corners, practice marks. Arabic letters looping over and over, and beneath it all, faint traces of fingerprints. Small ones. Tonight's mainstream fact is this. In Timbuktu, education wasn't confined to mosque schools. Many children, boys and girls alike, received instruction at home. Women who were literate often served as private tutors to their children, nieces, and neighborhood girls. These weren't formal schools, but they were just as foundational. And your delightfully odd tidbit. In one 15th century home, archaeologists found a clay pot sealed with wax. Inside, dried beetles, crushed to produce a reddish ink pigment. Apparently someone thought beetle ink was especially long-lasting. Whether it was the color or just an experiment gone rogue, we'll never know. But the pot was stored alongside writing tools, so someone clearly meant business. You walk further into the house, now quieter than a breath. In a back room, there's a low shelf with a few bound volumes. Not the Grand Qurans or legal texts, but smaller, more practical books. Grammar lessons, Arabic proverbs, and one curious little volume simply titled Sayings of Mothers. It's handwritten, of course, in slanted script with ink that starts dark and slowly fades. Some entries are only a line long. Always rinse the inkstone, or your words will be dirty. Use 2 eyes and 1 pen. Better to know 3 books well than 50 poorly. They're not maxims from scholars or sages. They're household wisdom, likely passed down orally, then finally written down, perhaps by a daughter who wanted to remember her mother's voice after she was gone. You run your hand along the spine of the book, and the air seems to hum with old advice. Historians still argue whether these informal teachings carried academic weight or were considered merely domestic. But then again, who decides what counts as education? If a girl learned to read Quranic Arabic at her mother's knee, copied her father's letters, memorized poetry between meals, was she not in essence a scholar in the making? You sit where one student might have sat. The cushion is flattened by time, but still soft. The corner of the room catches the moonlight just right, enough to imagine a child leaning into a lesson. Perhaps the mother sat across from her, gently correcting her script, nudging her back to the right line. A simple scene, yet monumental. And you notice something else. A faint ink drawing on the inner wall, half hidden behind a drape. It's not elaborate, just a palm tree, sketched hastily in the margin of someone's day. Likely a child's doing. But someone let it stay. No one scrubbed it off, and that says more than any record ever could. There's a loose page tucked beneath one of the grammar books. You slip it out gently. It's a list. Not a shopping list, unless someone had very peculiar taste, but a catalog of phrases, some in Arabic, some in Songhai, others that look like early Bambara. Each line includes a translation. Water, salt, ink, wisdom, mother's lap. You notice a symbol next to each word, maybe a mnemonic or a pronunciation guide. The script is rounded, warm, clearly written with care. You realize what this might be: a teaching aid, a multilingual vocabulary list designed to help young learners move between tongues. It's the ancient version of a flashcard app. And somewhere, centuries ago, a woman probably pointed to these words and smiled, coaxing her student to say them aloud. You lean back against the cool wall and think about that moment. Language as legacy, passed from one careful mouth to another. Not through warfare, not through decree, but through repetition. Through lullabies and grammar drills, through a mother's patience. This home isn't grand. There are no golden lamps or shelves stacked with prestigious tomes. But the learning that happened here? It echoes louder than any lecture hall. It's found in careful margins, in drawn palm trees, in beetle ink stains, and wise proverbs tucked into children's books. And just when you're about to leave, you notice a line etched faintly into the base of the doorway, like a parting whisper. Those who read must also rest. A smile tugs at the corner of your mouth. It's nice to know that even centuries ago, someone understood the value of putting down the pen and just breathing. So you do. You step back into the moonlight, head bowed, thoughts full of chalky walls and beetle ink, your own fingers itching for a pen you don't carry. Because tonight, it's not your turn to write, it's your turn to remember. Your path veers now toward the outskirts, where the city's mud brick veins dissolve into open dunes. Fewer buildings here. Fewer voices. Just the scrape of your sandals against sand-swept stone, and the occasional creak of wood from half-forgotten doors. You're heading into the edge places, where homes gave way to gardens, and gardens gave way to memory. Here lies a different kind of story. Not one built on ink and parchment, but on fabric, herbs, and coded conversation. Because the women of Timbuktu weren't just scribes, they were also keepers of oral traditions, herbal lore, and quiet revolutions. Some wielded styluses, yes. Others wielded stories. You arrive at a small compound, its walls no higher than your chest. Beyond them, a courtyard ringed by sun-baked benches and drying herbs tied in neat bundles. This was likely a women's space, a compound where midwives, healers, and elder matriarchs gathered to talk, teach, and tend. Tonight's lesson isn't in a book. It's floating in the air, carried by the scent of crushed myrrh and mint. Mainstream fact: while Timbuktu is known for its manuscript heritage, the broader intellectual life of the city included oral knowledge passed down primarily by women. This included medicinal practices, genealogies, spiritual counsel, and the coded wisdom of praise poetry, much of it never written but deeply influential. And for your odd detail of the night, some of these women used to dye their manuscripts with a solution made from onion skins and pomegranate rinds. Not for beauty, for preservation. The natural acids helped keep away insects and mildew. So yes, your grandmother's trick for repelling bugs with citrus? Nothing new. You pause in the courtyard and let your senses adjust. There's something uncanny about this place. Not haunted, just preserved. Like it's holding its breath, waiting for the next voice to break the silence. You notice a cluster of pottery jars nestled near a flat stone, each one stoppered with leather and sealed with wax. Labels have faded, but you can make out faint inscriptions. Saffron, coal, black seed, hibiscus ink. One jar is slightly ajar, and when you peek inside, you spot a delicate brush made of horsehair and reed. Not a pen, but something for illustrations, maybe illuminations, or markings on skin. There's a half-buried basket nearby, the weave coming undone. Inside, scraps of cloth with symbols painted in dark brown. Not calligraphy, more like pictographs or pattern codes. A system of notation that doesn't belong to the official language of Timbuktu, but definitely meant something. Maybe a recipe for a healing paste. Or a lineage passed down from mother to daughter, recorded not in words, but in shape and dye. Historians still argue whether these fabric records were supplemental or entirely separate from manuscript culture. Were they meant to complement scholarly texts? Or were they their own distinct library? One we've barely begun to decode? You lift one cloth square. It's soft, worn through at the corners, with a symbol in the center. A circle surrounded by dots, almost like a sun. Someone traced it with a careful hand, layering pigment until it darkened. You hold it up and for a moment it feels like a seal, a stamp of belonging. An unnamed woman's signature in a language only her descendants could read. You hear a murmur, not real, just the kind your brain conjures when everything's too quiet, but it sets a tone. A group of women gathered here, you imagine, teaching in circle. One speaks, the others listen, then repeat. A pattern like stitching. It wasn't just knowledge they passed, it was rhythm. You see it now, in the lines scratched into clay bricks forming a low border around the garden. Not decoration, markings, maybe memory aids, like early mnemonics carved into the bones of a home. You sit on the low bench and let your body settle. It creaks just like you do. The air is warmer here, shielded from the wind, and it smells like earth and pepper leaf. You try to picture a lesson in progress. Maybe a young girl with a notebook made of pressed fiber. Maybe her teacher with a string of beads she clicks together while she talks. The lesson could be anything. How to treat a fever with a paste of neem and goat milk. How to decode the metaphor in a Wolof poem. How to keep ink from drying too fast in the dry season. Or how to remember your grandmother's name, and hers, back 10 generations. You're surrounded by it now. This whole courtyard is a classroom. The bricks, the baskets, the plants, they're all part of the curriculum. And here's another strange thread for your night's unraveling. Some of these oral historians, called griots or griots, depending on the region, were trained from childhood and often sang their stories instead of speaking them. The melodies themselves carried memory, and if you broke the tune, you broke the truth. You glance up at the stars, those same ones again, still stubbornly beautiful, and you wonder how many of these women look to them for timing, for cues in their teaching songs, for celestial memory aids. After all, even a sky can be a syllabus. You close your eyes for a moment, just to listen. Wind brushing dried leaves, a donkey braying somewhere distant, the gentle rustle of your own breath, and under it all, maybe, just maybe, a hint of a voice, humming something old, something useful, something worth remembering. You rise slowly. The courtyard stays behind you, undisturbed, still cradling its knowledge in silence. Not everything needs a monument. Some histories prefer to whisper. As you step beyond the low gate, you glance back once, just in case. But the shadows have swallowed everything again. All that remains is the echo of layered wisdom, passed hand to hand, cloth to cloth, voice to voice. And you're carrying some of it now, whether you meant to or not. The night deepens now. The stars sharpen into icy little pinpricks overhead, glittering like spilled salt across black silk. The desert is quieter than ever, but you're not alone. You feel a companionship in the silence, as if every grain of sand has learned to keep secrets. Secrets like the one you're about to unearth. Your feet crunch across a dry path leading to what used to be the old scriptorium quarter, a modest network of homes and workshops where manuscript production was a bustling, everyday business. Contrary to the high romance of silent monks hunched in candlelit towers, Timbuktu's scribes worked in sunlight, surrounded by conversation, children playing, chickens underfoot. And some of those scribes were women. Quietly, consistently, invisibly, until now. Tonight's mainstream fact. Scriptoriums in Timbuktu were often run by families, not just male-dominated guilds. Women played vital roles, not only in copying and illuminating text, but in preparing the materials themselves, grinding ink, curing parchment, and maintaining inventories. Now your offbeat detail? One woman's signature, found at the end of a legal document dated to the 1500s, was written in a curious blend of cursive Arabic and Songhai phonetics. Her name? Likely Amanatu, though the scholars argue about that. What they agree on? She signed it with a tiny sketch of a hand holding a pen. Timbuktu's version of this document approved by yours truly. You slip down a narrow lane and arrive at a half-collapsed doorway. Its lintel is still sturdy, etched with script that curls like vines. This was once a workshop. You step inside and are greeted by the smell of paper dust, dry wood, maybe a hint of beeswax from the old polish rubbed into work tables. A soft, invisible archive clinging to the walls. The room is long and rectangular. Along one wall, a bench with a groove worn deep from decades, maybe centuries, of scribes leaning in. Against another, an open shelf with niches that once held folded manuscripts, now mostly empty but still bearing faint labels. One reads fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence. Another, hikmah, wisdom, and one simply marked with the symbol of a bird. Nobody knows why. You sit on the low bench, tracing a groove with your finger. You can imagine the rhythm here, a scribe leaning in, pen to parchment, dipping into a small pot of ink ground from charcoal and dried figs. Maybe a woman, her sleeves rolled up, hair bound back, eyes narrowed in concentration. She doesn't copy mindlessly. She reads, she edits. She knows what belongs in the margins. Historians still debate whether women were formally trained in scribe schools or learned informally through apprenticeship within families. But several surviving documents include feminine grammatical endings or refer to their own scribes in the feminine form, proof hiding in plain sight. In the far corner, you find a low cabinet with a broken drawer. Inside, scattered scraps of parchment, too fragile to move but still bearing ghostly marks of ink. Most are practice lines, repeated phrases. A few little doodles, too. Swirls, spirals, one that looks suspiciously like a cat. Someone somewhere got bored during a lesson. And there's something else. A book cover. Just the cover. Leather, worn to suede, but still strong. Pressed into it is a faint design. Overlapping crescents surrounding a star. Not religious symbolism exactly. More likely a family seal, a mark of ownership. You wonder if this was the work of a female binder. A rare craft, but not unheard of. Women often assisted in binding books, especially those kept in household libraries. You lift the cover. Underneath, a single page. It's thin and delicate, but intact. A prayer, maybe? The script is slightly uneven, but lovingly done. At the bottom corner is the smallest symbol, a 5-pointed flower. A scribe's mark, probably. Their version of a watermark. And based on the ink and style, scholars believe it might belong to one of the few known female scribe families in Timbuktu. The Bint Kati line. You breathe out slowly. Your breath disturbs a curtain of dust, sending it spiraling through a shaft of moonlight like golden smoke. It's beautiful, in a very sneeze-inducing kind of way. The work of these women wasn't flashy, it wasn't gilded or gold-leafed, but it was precise, practical, and persistent. Page after page, copied by hand, each one a link in a chain of knowledge that stretched across generations. Some of these women never signed their names, some only left initials. Others, like Aminatu, slipped in tiny flourishes to say, "Yes, I was here." You imagine one of them at her desk, a child tugging at her scarf, a kettle warming nearby. She dips her pen, starts a new page. She doesn't expect fame. She's preserving law, history, medicine, words that might guide someone long after she's gone. And maybe, just maybe, that someone is you. Because here you are, centuries later, in the dust of her workshop, breathing the same air, tracing her work, wondering what she thought about when she paused mid-line. Was she hungry? Was she tired? Was she happy with her work? Did she dream her ink would outlive her? There's a worn stool in the corner, still sturdy. You sit for a while. No rush, no tourists. Just you and the ghosts of forgotten scribes, sharing space under the old beams. And just before you go, you spot something odd, etched faintly into the plaster above the shelf. A line in Arabic, translated roughly to, "What is remembered is never gone." Beneath it, a single letter. In, Nun. The first letter of the word, Nur. Light? Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it's the last quiet joke from a woman who knew her light would last far longer than her name. You leave the workshop behind, but you carry that final thought with you, like a tiny flower pressed in the pages of your mind. What is remembered is never gone. And you, wanderer, you're remembering now. Your path dips now into shadowed alleyways, the kind that snake behind grand mosques and tumble past neglected wells. The wind has picked up just a little, whispering secrets around corners and brushing against the nape of your neck like a knowing hand. Timbuktu is quieter here, like it's watching you closely, wondering what you'll uncover next. You move with care past shuttered doorways where wooden beams are inscribed with blessings and warnings. Same thing, depending on your mood. Here in these older quarters, the line between fact and folklore gets fuzzier than a camel's armpit. Welcome to the part of the city where the records end and the rumors begin. Tonight's mainstream historical fact. While Timbuktu is famous for its manuscripts, a significant number were never officially archived, especially those copied or curated in private households. Many women maintained shadow libraries in their homes, compiling texts for personal, spiritual, or educational use. These collections were often excluded from formal academic recognition, but were vital to the city's intellectual ecosystem. And now, your quirky tidbit of the hour. Some manuscript bundles were wrapped not in cloth or leather, but in pages from older, retired texts. Essentially manuscript hand-me-downs. Think of it as the medieval version of reusing your siblings' math homework as scrap paper for your own novel. These wrapped bundles were often tied with palm fiber and tucked into clay jars for safekeeping. A few were even buried under garden tiles. No, not for magic, for mold control. You try explaining that to modern librarians. Historians still argue whether these household collections were mostly devotional or practical. Some suggest they leaned toward the esoteric, dream interpretation, astrological predictions, domestic remedies, and love charms. Others believe these kitchen libraries were simply the female parallel to the male scholarly canon, a shadow syllabus running alongside the official one. You duck beneath a stone lintel, brushing your hand across the cool surface. Ahead is a low building with an arched doorway, just tall enough for you to pass through if you slouch slightly. So you do. You've earned a little hunch by now. Inside, the air is unexpectedly sweet, like dates and dry grass. There's no roof anymore, just a stretch of stars looking down like nosy neighbors. This was once someone's home. A scribe, perhaps, or a midwife, or a merchant's wife with an obsession for collecting scrolls no one else wanted. A pile of stones near the corner could have been an oven. A shelf, now fallen, still cradles a single intact jar, sealed with what looks like beeswax and stamped with a crude impression of a flower. You recognize that symbol. It's the same as the one from the bookbinding shop. We're not in a library anymore. We're in someone's living room archive. You crouch beside the jar and tap it gently. It doesn't move. But the lid is loose. Inside? Not gold, not jewels, just a folded cloth bundle wrapped and rewrapped like someone really didn't want it to unfold accidentally. You set it in your lap and untie the outer fiber. Then the next. And then you find it. 4 small folios no bigger than your palm. One is titled in careful Arabic script, On the Restless Heart and How to Calm It. You crack a smile. That's relatable. The pages are filled with soothing verses, small herbal suggestions, infusions of tamarind, readings of specific surahs, and notes in the margin, personal ones. Didn't work. Try again on full moon. Hide this from Kay. Kay, you assume, didn't approve of self-medicated serenity. Another folio contains a miniature chart of lunar phases drawn beside illustrations of hands and various gestures. Not quite sign language. Not quite charms. Maybe both? There's no key. But it's clear someone used this to track moods. Or maybe lessons. Or maybe someone else entirely used it to teach a child how to count to 7 while reciting poetry backwards. We'll never know. That's the thing about these household manuscripts. They weren't intended for historians. They were for real life. Real women who had real afternoons full of fevered children, sour tamarind, and words that sometimes helped, sometimes didn't. You flip to the last page of the final folio. The handwriting shifts. Looser, more experimental, almost playful. It's a prayer, but not a formal one. It starts, "For the days that drag me like a donkey through dust." You pause reading the lines aloud in your head. It's beautiful, sharp, real. Who wrote this? No signature, no date. Just the emotion, preserved like a pressed flower. You can almost hear the sigh in her throat, the scrape of her chair as she wrote it down at the end of a long, dusty day. This was the feminine Timbuktu we rarely talk about. Not just scholars and scribes in robes and turbans, but mothers, daughters, sisters, lovers, all copying, noting, filing, dreaming. Maybe with a kid on their lap and lentils boiling in the next room. And it wasn't just about passing knowledge forward, it was about survival. About carving space to think and feel and understand the world, even if no one acknowledged their effort. Even if no official library ever listed their names. You sit for a long time in that roofless room, the folio still open beside you. The stars are directly overhead now. They don't blink. Just burn steadily. Witnesses to centuries of breath, ink, and the quiet resilience of women writing things no one expected them to write. You tuck the folios back into their bundle and return them to the jar. You seal it gently, leaving the past where it was, accessible but undisturbed. That feels right. And as you step out, something strange happens. A wind lifts across the alley, and for a second it sounds like whispering. Not ghostly, not spooky. More like a group of women softly reading to each other. You smile. Could be imagination. Could be history remembering itself. Either way, you walk on, deeper into the city that never really stopped recording. It just switched pens. The streets narrow even further now, hemmed in by walls that lean like old friends trying to eavesdrop. You turn sideways to slip through, brushing against centuries of plaster that flakes gently onto your shoulders like ancestral dandruff. The air carries a subtle mix of spices, clove, maybe, and something vaguely medicinal. A good sign. You're approaching the herbalist quarter. This part of Timbuktu isn't marked on old maps. Not because it wasn't important, on the contrary, it pulsed quietly at the heart of community life, but because it was unofficial. Oral, domestic, women-led. Here comes tonight's mainstream historical fact. In 15th and 16th century Timbuktu, medicine wasn't the domain of only scholars and clerics. Female healers practiced a mixture of Islamic medicinal theory and local knowledge, passed from woman to woman. Their remedies were often written down in private notebooks or copied into community collections. These manuscripts rarely made it to formal libraries, but they saved lives. Now, for your quirky tidbit, one recovered folio contains a recipe for sleep assistance, which includes crushed poppy seeds, powdered ostrich shell, and the presence of a reciting friend, which frankly is the Timbuktu version of a bedtime story with aromatherapy and moral support. You're living that recipe right now, minus the ostrich. Historians still argue whether these healing women were considered scholars in their own right, or simply practical caretakers. Some suggest they occupied a blurry line, respected in their community but largely excluded from written histories, unless their work intersected with major male figures or significant illnesses. You know, like when the city's quadi had gas. You reach a courtyard tucked behind a double archway. The ground is tiled in faded blue, a luxury at the time, now cracked and covered in fine dust. In the center, a flat stone slab, once used for drying herbs in sunlight. Around you, niches carved into the walls hold old jars, folded cloths, and a few still colorful bundles. This was a herbarium, maybe even a teaching space. You run your fingers over a smooth clay pot. It's labeled in delicate script, nafs, the self, or soul. You lift the lid. It's empty now, but the scent remains. Minty, sharp, with a ghost of bitterness. Someone once used this to prepare a treatment for anxiety, no doubt, and probably to flavor tea during gossip hour. Scattered around the courtyard are pages. Many are warped from age like wrinkled leaves, but one still holds a full page of text. You squint to make it out. It's titled, On the Humors of the Restless Child. You smile. Sounds familiar. The text is half medical notes, half poetry. It recommends a mixture of henna bark, cooled water, and verses from Surah Maryam. But then it takes a turn. If the child cries still, it is perhaps the house that holds the worry. Burn bay leaves at dusk. Sing the name of the prophet with your hands on the child's feet. You pause. That's not science. That's something deeper. That's love disguised as ritual. A way to soothe not just the body, but the spirit of a household. You sit by the slab, imagining a circle of women around you. Not formally educated, maybe, but intensely wise. Some could read, some couldn't, but all could remember. Recipes, blessings, warnings, treatments, passed on through lullabies and instructions muttered under breath while stirring soup. It's believed some of these women created what we might now call proto-zines, small personal manuscripts that combined health advice, seasonal observations, and even dream diaries. They'd trade them between households, update them with pencil corrections, and pass them down. And tucked inside these slim volumes, notes to future readers. Use with care. Worked for Fatima's second boy. Avoid during red moon. Imagine that. A manuscript annotated not by scholars in robes, but by barefoot mothers balancing babies on their hips, and memories in their minds. One recovered note famously ends with, I write this so the next woman need not guess. That's it. No name, no title. Just a quiet solidarity scrawled in the margin. You step into the adjoining room, windowless, cool, and shadowy. Here, bundles are hung from hooks, each tied with different colored threads. Some include pressed flowers, others feathers. One has a bit of string wrapped into a knot as though sealing a story shut. These bundles were personal libraries, specific to ailments or emotions. A red-threaded scroll is titled On the Fever of Separation. You open it gingerly. The writing is delicate, almost shaky. It suggests soaking tamarind in rainwater and wrapping it in a scarf, then sleeping with it under your head for 3 nights. Then it simply says, write his name once on the palm, wash it off in the river. Breakups, it seems, have always been universal. Another bundle is marked for memory. The ink is brighter, likely newer. It includes passages from the Quran, of course, but also a few riddles and a poem in the local Tamashek dialect about a turtle who forgets its own shell. Cute. Philosophical. You're not sure if it helped anyone's memory, but it probably made someone laugh. The room is filled with these traces, not grand revelations, but small survivals. Knowledge not built for legacy, but for use. For the bleeding knee, for the grieving sister, for the anxious bride, for the colicky child whose mother has tried everything else. And here's the secret. They wrote it down. Not because they wanted fame, but because they wanted the next woman to have a chance at a slightly easier night. You pause before leaving the courtyard. Above the door, etched faintly, are the words, every ailment has its root in forgetting. You don't know if it's from the Quran or from someone's grandmother. Doesn't matter, it rings true. So you step back into the night, past the herb-drying slab, past the soul-scented jar, past the bundles that feel like paper bandages. Because here in Timbuktu, the women didn't just write to be remembered. They wrote so you could remember yourself. The sand beneath your feet softens now, shifting almost imperceptibly with each step, like the city is exhaling. You leave the healing courtyard behind and meander down a slope that leads toward the edge of town, the part locals used to call the Listening Hills. It's quieter out here. The air grows cooler, tinged with sagebrush and old charcoal, the kind left behind by small, vanished fires. This is where stories were told aloud before they were ever written. You're in the territory of oral history, an essential tributary feeding Timbuktu's intellectual river, and one especially nurtured by women. Your mainstream historical fact for tonight: while West Africa is celebrated for its written manuscripts, oral tradition held equal importance. Female griots, also called GLIW, were often entrusted with preserving genealogies, local history, and morality tales. Their performances weren't just entertainment, they were community memory in motion. And the quirky tidbit, some griots used props during storytelling, including small wooden dolls and folded fabric creatures, which they'd animate during performances for children. Basically, the original puppet show with a moral compass. Imagine a centuries-old TED Talk meets sock puppet theater, but with more tambourines and fewer buzzwords. Historians still argue whether these women were formally recognized as historians or merely entertainers. Some suggest they operated in a parallel sphere of authority, one that held influence over emotional and social narratives, if not academic ones. Others say their contributions were intentionally marginalized as literacy became the preferred currency of legacy. You find a flat stone and sit for a while, letting your eyes adjust to the quiet. Out here, there's no glow from lanterns or the murmurs of alleyway markets. Just the rustle of wind dragging soft strands of sand across the ground, like fingers skimming the surface of a drum. This is where mothers and aunts and older sisters gathered children in loose circles and began their stories with ancient openers. Not once upon a time. No. Something older. Something like, this came before the dust remembered its name. Which, if we're being honest, is a lot cooler. The griots were performers, yes, but they were also archivists with rhythm. Their stories weren't just about kings and trade routes. They told of clever daughters who tricked demon spirits by pretending to be chickens, of old midwives who whispered the names of stars into newborns' ears, of floods and famines, and the day the moon refused to rise. Many of these stories, especially those passed through female griots, carried coded knowledge. Recipes, moral frameworks, political commentary tucked inside metaphors about talking goats or invisible bridges. You had to be in the know. If you weren't, you laughed at the story and missed the message entirely. There's one that survives even today, about a girl named Aicha who challenged the city's great scholars with a riddle. What is the thing that has one root but 1,000 branches, and can hold both love and poison in its leaves? No one answered correctly. The answer, according to Aicha, was a woman's memory. It can grow, forgive, wound, and remember, all at once. You smile. Nice one, Aicha. You lean back against the stone, thinking about how many such stories were told and retold here. Most were never written down. Some were, years later, recorded by male scribes who reworded, reframed, or politely omitted the sharper bits. But for the most part, these were live performances. Ephemeral, powerful, and deeply specific to those who heard them. You imagine a woman standing in the moonlight, her scarf tied low, her hands gesturing fluidly as she weaves a tale. A child leans forward, wide-eyed. A teenage girl pretends not to care but doesn't miss a word. An elder nods slowly, remembering the original version from decades before. This is legacy. Not fixed on parchment, but living in rhythm and breath. And some griots traveled. They walked from town to town with stories tucked under their tongues like precious seeds. Occasionally, they'd trade tales, literally barter narratives in exchange for shelter, food, or a new riddle. One well-known griot was said to have paid her caravan tolls in epics. The guard just wanted 2 goats. He got a 6-hour tragedy about a cursed calabash instead. Mixed reviews. But griots also encoded trauma. Their stories often held memories of war, slavery, and personal loss. They used allegory to carry pain where direct speech would have been too dangerous. A tale about a silenced bird might actually be about colonial disruption. A story of a forgotten princess? Probably someone erased from the records. And here's something to hold on to. Not all griots told other people's stories. Some told their own. Disguised, yes, wrapped in myth. But their voices still slipped through. There's a reconstructed tale in one manuscript, believed to be transcribed by a female student at Sankore. It tells of a woman named Kanu, a healer who loses her voice after curing a royal family's plague. The twist: she can still speak, but only in dreams. And in these dreams, she tells her story again and again until it echoes through the waking world. You sit in silence for a while, thinking about Kanu. Maybe her story was someone's truth once. Maybe it still is. The stars above look different now, less scattered, more like stitched thread pulled tight across velvet. You imagine those griots weaving their stories across the sky, pinning memory between constellations? And just before you get up, you whisper something aloud. Doesn't matter what. Maybe a line you remember. Maybe something you made up. That's how griot stories survive. Someone hears them, holds them, and then lets them loose into the night again, even centuries later. So you walk on. The city's edge becomes its beginning again, and the line between storyteller and listener vanishes in the sand behind you. You keep walking, and the earth flattens into a gentle plain, where the city's heartbeat fades into a slower rhythm. There's a hush here. Not silence exactly, but something more sacred. Like Timbuktu itself has lowered its voice to a whisper, and you're invited to lean in close. Your feet find a path between scattered stones, the kind laid down long ago to mark old trade routes. It's barely there now, worn thin by centuries of sandals, wheels, and hoofbeats. But it's enough. This path once led to the city's outer academies, small study circles and satellite schools where knowledge stretched its legs and walked under the open sky. Tonight's mainstream historical fact: beyond its libraries and major mosques, Timbuktu supported informal learning spaces, often organized by women in domestic settings or open courtyards. These study groups tackled everything from basic literacy to advanced theological debate. And your quirky fringe tidbit: one such circle supposedly met under a baobab tree, where women scribes read aloud while breastfeeding their infants and sharing flatbread. Multitasking Timbuktu style. Honestly, who needs a podcast when you have theology and teething in the same afternoon? Historians still argue whether these gatherings were truly academic institutions or more akin to community clubs. Some believe they bridged the gap, functioning as both intellectual havens and social support networks. Others say they were tolerated rather than celebrated, allowed to exist in the margins so long as they didn't challenge formal authority too loudly. As you walk, you pass the ghost of one such gathering. The foundation stones remain, 4 squares in a ring, one for each corner of a shaded platform where women once sat cross-legged with children asleep in their laps and books balanced on their knees. No chalkboards, no tuition fees, just wisdom, woven with patience and mint tea. This wasn't school as empire building, it was school as refuge. A faded etching on one rock reads, "Better to know a verse than to carry gold." You smile. It's not a dig at wealth, just a reminder that treasure can be portable and intangible, carried in the mind like a flame in a lantern. One scroll discovered in this area, worn and smudged, includes a woman's marginalia that simply says, "This part is hard, read it slow," twice. Same energy as your middle school math notes, just in the 16th century Arabic. These women weren't always from elite families. Some were daughters of merchants or scribes, others former servants who earned literacy by copying texts by candlelight. A few were even wives of scholars who learned quietly at first, then asked sharper and sharper questions until eventually the roles reversed. One well-preserved teaching manuscript ends abruptly with a final scribble. Must stop here. Aminata's walking now. That's it. Class dismissed. Baby's mobile. You can imagine it, can't you? A debate on jurisprudence interrupted by an overturned pot, or someone reciting hadith while rocking a cradle with one foot. Academia in motion, scholarship with spit up on its sleeve. You sit on one of the stone platforms, brushing off the dust. The air smells faintly of dried millet and old parchment. A breeze rustles nearby shrubs, sounding suspiciously like whispered study notes being passed along again. What did they read here? Quranic verses, of course, but also texts on logic, grammar, astronomy. Occasionally poetry. Some groups wrote their own commentary, filling the blank margins of older texts with observations, critiques, and every so often, a joke. One copy of Al-Ghazali's work includes this note in a female hand. He argues too much, but he's not wrong. Timeless. But perhaps the most precious part of these study sessions wasn't what they learned, it was how they did it. Slowly, repeatedly, out loud. The practice of tilawa, of reciting aloud not just for retention, but for rhythm. The rise and fall of words like breathing. Like prayer. And that's when it hits you. These women weren't just copying texts. They were syncing their voices with centuries of thinkers, becoming part of a tradition by literally speaking it into the world. There's even evidence that some use song as a memory aid, turning complex theological ideas into verses that could be sung while grinding grain or washing clothes. One recovered fragment includes what appears to be a rhyming list of Quranic chapters in a melody pattern common to Tuareg lullabies. So yes, they turned their homework into mixtapes. Respect. As dusk deepens, you notice a single tree still standing nearby. Probably not the original baobab, but its descendant. Wide-trunked, solemn, kind. You walk toward it and rest a hand against its bark. It's cool and rough, like a well-used table full of stories, and there's something carved here. Faint, almost gone. A name, not a famous one. Just Halima. And beneath it, she listened. You stay a moment longer, imagining Halima with her head tilted, brows furrowed, repeating someone's words until they clicked. That quiet moment of understanding when confusion turns to clarity. That's a kind of magic, too. Maybe she taught others. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she just listened because it made her feel less alone in the world. Either way, she's part of the legacy now, and so are you. You leave a small stone on the platform before you go. It's what people used to do here to mark attendance. Not for a roll call, but as a quiet promise. I was here. I heard. I remember. As you walk away, you hear nothing but your own steps and the breath of the wind. But the silence feels full, not empty. Somewhere behind you, maybe under that tree, a whisper rises. A verse, a fragment, a reminder. The lesson never ends. It just waits for someone new to arrive. The road narrows now, curling gently like a ribbon lost in the folds of sand. The city is nearly behind you, but its spirit clings to your shoulders, warm and steady. Timbuktu isn't just a place, it's a rhythm. And that rhythm still thrums in your steps as you near the final corner of this ancient journey. Here, past the ruins of learning circles and storytelling hills, lies a quieter quarter. No shrines, no courtyards. Just modest homes, long since faded, their wood beams sagging gently under the weight of centuries. This was the scribes' district, but not the grand scholars with patrons and camel caravans. No, this was where the overlooked ones lived. Tonight's mainstream historical fact. Timbuktu's economy relied not only on scholars and traders, but also on laborers, many of them women, who physically produced, bound, repaired, and sometimes even annotated manuscripts. Think medieval publishing house, but with goatskin and lamp soot. And your quirky detail to tuck under your pillow. Some scribes used recycled paper or scrap parchment from old letters and merchant records, meaning that the back of a theology text might include someone's grocery list or a badly spelled love note. History has layers, and sometimes love hides beneath logic. Historians still argue whether these women were considered scribes in the official sense or simply laborers with pens. Some evidence suggests that a few were indeed contracted for their transcription skills. Others seem to have worked within family units, mother copying, daughter illuminating, son delivering. Scribe squads. You reach a weather-worn doorway, the kind that creaks even when it's shut. You imagine stepping inside. The air would smell of oil and ash. You'd see a long bench, a clay inkwell dark with residue, and strips of parchment drying like laundry on a line. In this home, a woman, let's call her Yagana, once sat for hours at a time, bent over text. She wasn't famed, she wasn't rich, but she copied wisdom with such precision that scholars trusted her pages more than their own notes. You picture her hands, ink-stained at the fingertips, always dry from parchment dust. Her eyes red-rimmed but sharp. She knew the curl of every letter, the rhythm of each verse, and when to pause for a sip of millet broth before starting the next page. The margins were hers alone, while the words belonged to the scholars, the spaces around them. That's where she lived. You can almost hear her humming, maybe bored, maybe focused. Occasionally she'd sneak in a small flourish, a swirl on the final letter, or a tiny drawn flower only she would notice. One manuscript found in this district includes a note in faint script. Corrected the verse here. Scholar misquoted. No name, just truth. You know she grinned when she wrote it. Who says footnotes can't be spicy? The work was hard. Inks smudged, pens split. Heat made the pages curl like toasted bread. And yet they persisted. Because every scroll copied meant knowledge preserved. Every binding repaired meant a student could study longer. Every hour spent on handwriting was a defiance of forgetting. You spot a wall with faint ink smears where papers once hung to dry. One larger smear looks like a small handprint. A child's. Maybe someone got too close and learned very quickly that ink doesn't taste like honey. It wasn't glamorous. No applause, no end of semester pizza party. But the labor of these women was foundational. They were the infrastructure beneath the brilliance, the quiet scaffolding holding up every treatise, legal argument, and poetic flourish. And some dared to write their own words. There's one surviving page, just one, signed by a woman named Ramatu. The text is simple. A short poem praising patience and silence, penned in soft lines and tucked between two legal texts. It reads, I write what I cannot say. I mend what I did not break. I remember what you forget. Her voice reaches you centuries later like a breath through a keyhole. You walk a little slower now, trailing your fingers along the cracked clay walls. Every mark feels like a pulse, a fragment of the lives lived between ink and ash. And then, without fanfare, the houses fall away. You're on the outskirts now. A patch of pale grass, a sky turned the color of burned sugar. The city behind you exhales again. You turn once, looking back. Every lesson, every laugh, every whispered story, they're all still there. Still alive in parchment and powder, in etched stone and remembered songs. The forgotten female scribes of Timbuktu, not forgotten at all, just waiting for someone, like you, to listen long enough to hear them. You take one final breath in through your nose. It smells of dust and ink and distant stars. So now let the dust settle. Let your breathing slow as the last traces of candlelight flicker out in the city behind you. The quills are laid down, the manuscripts closed, the courtyard has emptied, and the griot's songs have softened into memory. The stories have done their work. They've wrapped around you like a shawl, warm and whisper light. Every footstep you imagined, every ink stroke and palm leaf rustle. They linger gently, not to keep you awake, but to help you let go. Your thoughts, once active, begin to quiet. There's no more need to wander the halls of Sankaré or peek into a scribe's margin. You've walked every alley, met every echo, and followed the soft footprints of women who worked in silence but lived with purpose. Let your bodies sink now. Your arms feel heavier, your breath slower, your mind softer. Each breath out is a page turning, folding the day closed. In the distance, the wind plays through the old trees, not as a voice this time, but as a lullaby. A hush-hush rhythm older than parchment, deeper than ink. A rhythm meant for dreaming. Whatever worries the day held, let them drift like ash from a snuffed lamp. Whatever tomorrow asks, answer it slowly, gently when morning finds you again. But for now, let the moonlight cradle your thoughts, and the darkness rock you back into yourself. You've been a traveler, a listener, a keeper of memory tonight. But now, just rest. Good night and sleep well.